This is Transit Unplugged. I'm your host, Paul Comfort. Great to be with you for another edition of the world's leading transit executive podcast, Transit Unplugged. Today, news and views. We've got an amazing program for you today. I think you'll really enjoy it. We've got John Seber, the Executive Director of the Central Indiana Regional Transportation Authority, who's our Newsmaker guest. We've got some great headline news just now, and then wait to the end of the podcast for a great interview with Scott Bogren, Executive Director of the Community Transportation Association of America, and Mr. Vax Transit himself, Stuart Mader. We're going to be talking about a new study that CTAA came out with just last week, and 6 recommendations for where public transportation should go in the future based on the lessons we learned during COVID. I think you'll find it a fascinating interview. Speaking of CTAA, this week is their in-person SUN conference, Small Urban Network Conference, that I'm at right now as you're listening to this in Montana, and going to be getting some great interviews with some transit executives there and association executives for upcoming episodes of Transit Unplugged. And now for a look at headline news. Here in the United States, the Senate over the weekend put the finishing touches on its bipartisan infrastructure bill. And earlier this week on Monday, Democrats released their $3.5 trillion budget plan that sets the stage for a massive investment in transportation, social programs, and climate policy. The plan fits into what Democrats consider a complementary two-part agenda to boost the economy, strengthen the social safety net, and attempt to curb climate change. The party will have to carry out a complicated legislative dance to get both proposals through Congress in the coming months. First, the Senate could pass the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill this week. They may have already passed it by the time you're listening to it. The plan calls for $550 billion in new spending on transportation, utilities, and broadband, and is expected to get broad support in the Senate. Over the weekend, the Senate voted a procedural move to go forward on the bill 68 to 29. So you can see there's 2/3 majority support. They only need 60 votes to break for cloture and to break any attempted filibusters. And then Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says the Senate will then immediately move toward passing their budget resolution, which they're going to try to do evidently using special rules that won't require any Republican votes because they may not get any on that. So a lot happening right there. Speaking of Washington, D.C., the Federal Transit Administration has awarded a cooperative agreement totaling $5 million to the International Transportation Learning Center to support the first transit workforce center based in Silver Spring. The ITLC will serve as FTA's first ever National Technical Assistance Center to help transit agencies recruit, hire, train, and retain a diverse workforce needed now and in the future. And of course, we're hearing that all over the place, that transit agencies are really having trouble recruiting drivers and skilled technicians for their shops and other positions. And so the FTA has established this to conduct workforce development, technical assistance activities for transit agencies with a strong focus on frontline transit worker skill development. This could be a game changer for transit agencies. They're also going to help transit agencies develop their own workforce development programs. And so this could be very helpful. Jumping across this overseas now, in the nation of France, you may have heard there's been a number of big protests over the last 3 weekends. One of the reasons for that is that France is taking a very strong stance on vaccinations. This last week, it announced that all people, both travelers and residents, will need to present a, quote, health pass in order to eat out in restaurants, get this, use public transportation, or enter public venues and travel throughout the country. The health pass is proof of vaccination, either in digital or paper form. The law is set to go into effect on September 15th for all adults, and starting September 30th, it'll apply to everyone 12 and older. And as of now, the legislation is written for those who have been vaccinated in France. They're looking for further instructions coming in terms of how the country will handle vaccinations administered in other countries. Very interesting to see that pass, very similar to what's happening in New York City, although this one in France applies to public transit. And now also on the other side of the Atlantic, in Moscow, Russia, the Moscow Metro plans to implement contactless fare payment using facial recognition technology at all metro stations by the end of the year. To use the FacePay system, passengers must have a Russian bank account that has their biometric data on file. And after passengers approach one of the cameras installed at the turnstiles or ticket booths, the fare will automatically be debited from their account and the turnstiles will open. Interesting. And one last bit of news from the Visa credit card company, they've released the results of their Future of Urban Mobility survey, which shows that riders are expecting contactless payment options, and the younger generation is back again preferring public transit. The company surveyed 9,000 adults in 9 countries, and they found that 84% of public transit riders who have decreased their ridership since the start of COVID-19 pandemic plan to use public transit at the same rate as they did before the pandemic. So that's good news. The survey found that 88% of global respondents also expect a contactless payment option moving forward. 90% of US-based respondents said they expect it to happen. And Visa also partnered with the International Association of Public Transit, UITP, to create their own urban mobility payments platform. And so they're looking for more and more people to go contactless. The survey data showed that 88% of riders expect their local transit system to offer a contactless option for payments and ticketing. And you'll recall that last year, when the American Public Transportation Association did a survey, they found that that was one of the great new trends that public transit agencies around the country were moving toward, was contactless payment. And also, 35% of Generation Z respondents noted public transportation is their main method of transportation. Well, that's it for the headline news stories for this week's Transit Unplugged. Now stay tuned for our great interviews that are coming up on today's episode of Transit Unplugged. Enjoy. This is Transit Unplugged. I'm your host, Paul Comfort. Great to bring you a wonderful Newsmaker interview with a longtime friend of mine, John Seber. John's executive director at the Central Indiana Regional Transportation Authority near Indianapolis, Indiana. John, thanks so much for joining us today on the world's #1 transit executive podcast.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, Paul. It's great seeing you, buddy.
Yeah, you too. And it's been a little bit of a while. John and I have known each other for quite a while. How long back do we go, do you think, John?
Wow, probably around 2008, I'm guessing, somewhere in that range.
Yep. So we worked together at WMATA. We both were with MV, the paratransit service there. And then John was, so tell us a little about your background, just briefly, John. You've got quite an interesting background. I love the fact that you started in maintenance and you've made it up to be the executive director of a transit agency. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, and it is interesting. I've been in transit some way, shape, or form for now 33 years. And, I started out early on in my career as a line technician for Ford and General Motors. And then I went into over-the-road coaches, moved up to supervision, and then kind of bumped up from there. So I've been in both the public and private sector as a director. Had a great run with MV as both a director and a vice president of maintenance. Really enjoyed what I've learned there. And, being out within all the states, and I think I had about 100 locations throughout my career, just nationwide, and working with a lot of good people in the transit industry. You learn a lot, you expand services, and, just able to identify challenges a little easier as you start working through these things and getting things out there. So I'm excited to be back home in Indiana and working within the region to bring some of the experiences I have, back here to kind of help the counties out and further expand and develop services as well.
That's awesome. One of the things that I always thought was wild about you was how that you, like when we were in Washington, you would fly in. I mean, you lived in Indiana, but you would fly, like, what would you do? You'd come out for a couple of weeks, then go back for a few days, that kind of a thing?
Yeah, I'd do 2 to 3 weeks and then home for 3 to 4 days and then back. And, throughout my career, there's been, times I've been like in New York. And if you got a new project and different things, there was times I was on the ground for up to 4 months straight without being home. And I did travel for 20 years. And, it's great. Like I said, when you're working with good people and, you're going to a location and it kind of makes it easier. But, home life isn't as fun because you miss out on a lot of things. So people, they're always used to tell me, oh, you get to travel, you get to see places. And it's like, I get to see hotels and transit authorities, that's my life. So,
yeah. Well, speaking of family, you just had a big event. Your daughter graduated with her master's. That's awesome.
Yeah, my youngest, she graduated 2 weekends ago with her master's degree. We're very proud of her.
Hey, so tell us about the transition now. How long have you been here at the Central Indiana Transportation Authority. How long has that been? About a year?
No, well, close. Yeah, I started last September, so I guess we
Okay.
are we
Yeah,
are getting
almost about a
closer.
year.
Yeah.
What made you make the transition from, over 30 years really as a maintenance, started out as a technician, worked way up into management and then into senior management? Was it just the opportunity to work from home now or?
Well, I think it was a couple things, and even with my days on the road with MV on the more of the maintenance side, I mean, you're doing, I did a lot of complete, I think 55 project startups where I led those projects, and it was more than maintenance. I mean, I
Sure.
always was involved in operations and assisting and helping, and between writing policies and between dispatch and maintenance and trying to make sure things were paired together. I think working with some good people out there yourself, I can name several, just learning some skills and some positives. And I think I was able to go a little bit beyond maintenance and help some of these locations out. There was times I did sit in kind of in more of a GM role and helping out, trying to carry some things through. So I think that resonated over into what I'm currently doing. And when I interviewed here, it was about 3 different interviews with the board, and I think there were 78 candidates.
Wow.
So we went through all that, and they chose me. So again, I'm very very proud of that effort, and we're continuing to progress here, and the board's very happy. So
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is not just because you're one of the good guys and one of the best guys I know in the business, but also I think the agency you head is very unique. And in times like now, coming out of COVID, hopefully, people are looking at different models and how they run their transit services. It really has been a Simon Sinek why moment. Why are we doing? And then once you
right.
figure out why, then you can figure out what it is. So tell us what it is you all do there, because it's very unique, I think.
Yeah, it is. And, for a transit authority, the name, I guess, is kind of misleading to a degree, but, we were developed around 2004 as kind of a go-between between 10 different counties and helping to pair services and go beyond that county border, if you will. So there's a lot of things we do, a lot of programs we have, in place. We do a lot of ride share work with our outreach team. So a lot of this is, we have a database where we sign people up. We coordinate carpooling events, bike share events where we're coordinating people and routes, trying to get them to work, and van pools as well, which is a huge event. We just signed up this month, starting in August, 18 new van pools, which we're very excited about. And again, those are getting people across multiple counties. And again, we're reducing that carbon footprint. We're improving efficiencies, and of
You're
course,
getting people the
reducing
jobs,
costs.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So those are some big things. We do workforce connectors, which is where our service, where we bid out and contract out services where a transit authority service will end. We continue from that endpoint, if you will, going into another county to bring
Okay.
people across county into like big box warehouse districts and things for employment. And that is continuing to thrive and grow. We actually have 5 new routes in development right now that we've been working on. So that's an exciting time for us. Another big one we do is we partner with SACOA, which is the Central Indiana Council on Aging, and they've been around since '74. But we partner funding and some management services. But basically, what it is, it's almost like a paratransit. If you're ADA certified, you automatically can ride the service, and of course, we've got our own kind of certification. But this allows you to go beyond one county. You can go up to like 3 different counties, and even with COVID last year, we had almost 8,000 trips with that. And again, we're using current people, current providers in the region. We just signed them up and then coordinate and schedule with them. So it works out real good. We're utilizing these vehicles as much as possible. So we're reducing deadhead. We're reducing wasted time, vehicles being down, those kind of things, and really utilizing the fleets as much as possible.
I love the fact that you are doing a regional approach. So many transit agencies really just serve their city or their county, but you've got this multiple county or 10 counties in central Indiana that you're overseeing.
Yeah, it's great. My board, I couldn't be happier with. We have 16 board members, and we have 2 governor appointees, a couple mayor appointees, and various different county appointees. But everybody from every county is represented fairly in that. We have breakout sessions, a variety of different things. It's very informative, and I couldn't ask for a better board. I'm very happy with them.
So what's in the vision for the future of your agency and the services you're providing?
You know what? Right now, we just started a study where we're meeting with all the providers, and it's a technology directive, which is huge right now, as you know. But everybody's using some standalone systems for scheduling, dispatch, fare collection, mobile app or lack of. And so what we're doing is we're meeting with all the groups, trying to figure out what's working, what's not working, what would make things better, with the ultimate goal of this is by the end of November, early December, is putting a kind of a package together of here's some directives of how we need to move forward in more of a, and I don't want to use the word, I guess, centralized dispatch because I don't see it. Yeah, but it's more coordinated. Yeah.
Right.
And so what I see is overlap between counties. If we can get people on the same systems to have seamless travel between the counties, but you have a system map where you can see if someone's got to barely trickle into your county with a vehicle instead of deadheading back. If you've got someone that needs to go to that county, hey, I can tag into that vehicle, utilize that. So again, reduction in wasted deadhead, better utilization of vehicle efficiency, and ultimately improves the customer experience because you're not, people aren't waiting longer. And then if we can tie that into a mobile app, fair pay structure, everything, so it's a little easier to do. So that's one of our ultimate goals, something we're working on. And if it goes as planned, we can hopefully maybe see an RFP rollout in 22 with maybe an implementation countywide in 23.
Anything else you want to say before we wrap it up, John?
Yeah, Paul, I wanted to bring this up because it was a special moment for me. Back around 2009, I think we were wrapping up one of our WMATA meetings, and you had brought in a flyer you had from college. And I'll never forget, it was like a black and white flyer, and it was a picture of you. You were running for city council. And I remember the caption. It says, "I will work for you." And to this day, that still settles with me in a great way. And I think everybody in transit should have that same perspective, per se, because we're all here to help that person get where they need to be. And it's not about sometimes the small little things that I been around the block that people are worrying about. It's about getting the people from A to B. We're here for the people. We're not here for ourselves. We're not here for some other things. It's to help the people. And it's really true. So if anybody takes anything away from this podcast today, I hope they remember the "I will work for you," because that's what we're all here for. And even like our mission statement, we continue to focus on connecting to people, to places, and opportunities. And that's what we should all be doing. So I thank you for that, Paul, for sharing that back in 2009. And like I said, that's really resonated with me.
Thank you, John. A great trip down memory lane and a great example of how I think somebody can come from any part of the transportation industry and make it to the top, whether it's a driver, whether it's somebody in operations or safety, and now somebody from maintenance working their way to the top of the organization. Thanks so much, John, for sharing your heart with us and also continuing to do the great work you're doing in Central Indiana.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me today. Good seeing you.
This is Transit Unplugged, and now we're in the future of public transportation segment. Excited to have with us Scott Bogren, who is Executive Director of the Community Transportation Association of America, who is hosting their Big Small Urban Network Conference this week, and Stuart Mader, Mr. Vax Transit. Great to have you both with us.
Thanks.
Hey, Paul.
So, Scott, you all, CTAA, Community Transportation Association of America, which represents most of America's medium-sized, small urban systems across America, you all have just come out with a big study. Set it up for me. Tell me a little about it.
Sure. Well, I would say about 2 to 3 months ago, I started getting concerned that the entire narrative around the COVID-19 and public transit was only about how much money had been invested in transit. And not to say that I know, hearing from our members all across the country, they were grateful and those funds were desperately needed. but the narrative was only on that kind of piece of it, and nobody was talking enough, to my thinking at least, about all that transit was doing to help the country get through the pandemic. And like many of your listeners, I had been through social media and others watching what Stuart was putting together, Stuart Mader, on Vax transportation. And, sometimes you think to yourself, well, why reinvent the wheel? Let's talk to Stuart, see if we can contract with him and put together a document that with our membership really shows all of what has been done from the public transit perspective to assist residents, neighbors, their communities in getting through the pandemic. And, Stuart and I talked, and we wanted to focus it on access to vaccination. But then as he started talking to members, there were other key issues that started to raise up along the lines of obviously providing access to healthy foods, providing access to prescriptions, a lot of these other services that smaller transit systems around the country immediately engaged in on the onset of the pandemic. And what we were hoping for was what we got, which was a story to tell that says, yes, funds were invested in public transit throughout the pandemic, and they were important. But here is what the American people got and are getting for that investment. And in addition to that, Stuart, who really knows our business well, had a lot of good connections, he started to work on recommendations, because that was kind of the second piece of the document. Was like, well, here's what we did, but what have we learned? And what about what we've learned at the public transit space is going to really shape transit's future? And I thought Stuart did a great job with that. And I'll kind of toss to Stuart, because I know his discussions and interviews really are the heart of what he wrote for CTAA in this report.
Stuart, talk to us
Thanks.
a little bit about what you found, and particularly I want to make sure we have time to cover what the 6 recommendations are, because I think they are very strong.
Absolutely, and I just want to start and say thanks, Scott and CTAA, for working together on this and letting me go out and do something really, really fun and in many ways really reaffirming for our industry. And that's I talked to 15 transit providers across the country, a mix of providers, large and small, urban, rural, tribal transit providers. And the one common thread that I saw throughout the conversations, throughout writing this white paper is, in the midst of a crisis with incredible headwinds facing them, transit agencies did amazing things with the COVID-19 relief funds, with the emergency funds, to serve their communities, to recommit to their communities and get their communities through the crisis, and to tackle things like vaccine access, prescription access, food insecurity, and healthcare access, and do those things in ways that I think tell us that if we continue to invest in transit in a healthy way, and we do it in a way that gives agencies even greater ability to plan ahead in their budgets, they're going to continue to do great things. And just to give you a couple quick examples, one of my favorite examples in all the conversations was when I talked to Kirk Kuchera at Southern Minnesota Area Rural Transit, or Smart Transit. He told me about the work they did in the community with Hormel Foods. So in Austin, Minnesota, in downtown Austin, there's the Spam Museum, which Hormel Foods runs that, and it's a tourist attraction. They unfortunately had to shut down because of the pandemic. But what they did is Hormel paid a number of businesses, to food prep businesses, restaurants, delis, and so forth, to prepare meals, hundreds of meals a day, to keep those businesses in operation during the pandemic, to help the community. And then what those businesses did is they prepared meals, they dropped them off at the Spam Museum, and then Smart brought their buses to the Spam Museum. Volunteers loaded them up. They worked with the United Way, and volunteers loaded up those Smart buses, and then they went out in the community and they delivered meals. It's a wonderful example of, it's a public-private partnership. It's a wonderful example of transit turning on a dime and repurposing their vehicles to make sure that people were fed during the pandemic. And it was a wonderful way to keep the transit system moving, keep the frontline workers employed and moving. And there are examples like that from across the country. And
where do you think we head now, Stuart? That, I mean, we've covered that, as you know, Scott and I and others have covered that extensively. And I think it's been shown that transit really stepped up during the pandemic and showed its worth and value. I think the federal policymakers caught wind of it. And that's why they've realized that public transportation is not just a local responsibility. It's a national mandate that really we need federal involvement in a much bigger way on the operating dollars. And I think they've said that. Let's point to the future now in these last remaining minutes. Tell us what the recommendations are that you've come out with, because as I mentioned, I think they're really strong and point the way for public transit to remain not only relevant, but even more than that. It shows our criticality to the community.
Sure. So one of the biggest ones is to make public health a new focus area for transit. What we learned from vaccine access, from prescription drug access, healthcare and access and so forth during the pandemic is this is a major focus area and can be a major focus area and growth area for transit. It's already happening and it can grow from here. And that's important because traditionally, so to speak, there's a lot of emphasis on talking about transit as a vehicle to jobs, as commuter. Right. Serving a commuter function. But transit does and can play an even greater role in healthcare access. And that really matters, especially for underserved communities. It matters, especially in moments of crisis. And if transit can do so well as agencies did in the moment of crisis, just imagine what they can do in times that aren't, where they're not facing those same headwinds and they're able to really look at their service, plan things out, build partnerships with healthcare providers. That was another big one that I heard from agencies across the country. Heard that from Laura Kaprowski at TARTA in Toledo. They're really deepening their partnerships with large hospitals, employers in the region. So that's a really important one. Another one is when you look at fair payment, continuing to build equity and into fair payment. And there's agencies are taking different approaches on this. Some are looking at going to what's called zero fare or fare free. Robbie Mackinnon talked a lot about that out in Kansas City. And that's, Brandon Polisicchio in Dayton, Greater Dayton RTA. They're moving from to their TAP payment system, and they did something really, really nice. As people got vaccinated, they offered an incentive. You get 30 days worth of free transit rides on your TAP card if you got your vaccination. And what's great about that is it's a twin benefit. There's the public health benefit of getting people vaccinated, and then there's the customer experience benefit of giving people the ability to use their new fair payment system, which is simpler and easier to use, and giving people an incentive to be on transit. And so more of that, I think we're going to see more of that happening. And that's really critical. And then, so one of the other really critical recommendations is around federal support for transit, and evolving and rethinking that in ways that are really, I think, persistent and sustainable over the long term. And one of the things that I heard from agencies across the board is how valuable the support was from FTA and from USDOT, helping to get funds, federal funding for operations, allocating that funding quickly. The FTA published a comprehensive FAQ that really answered A to Z questions from transit agencies on how they could use the federal funding, what programs were eligible, what pandemic programs and responses could be funded with federal funding. And that's really critical because that helped agencies move quickly. There was a strong desire among the agencies I talked to be able to adapt quickly, do things to serve their communities, and be able to respond to requests locally, build partnerships, and to have the backing at the federal level from FTA and DOT to do those things, and to know that they had funds to do those things made all the difference in the world. And so, going forward, I think there's a lot from that I think can be translated into thinking about both the funding of agencies going forward, and we're certainly watching that closely with all the movement in Congress right now with legislation, and also on the regulatory and rules side for agencies. There's lots of good stuff that happened during the pandemic that there's I think an appetite among agencies to see that continue in ways that make sense going forward. And then another really important recommendation is around hiring and career development. One of the big challenges that agencies have faced in recent years is competition, whether it's from industries that are pulling away drivers with commercial driver's licenses, CDLs, to go into things like package delivery, or the attractiveness somewhat of the gig economy. It's easy to just jump in your car and go drive for one of the ride-hailing services. And I think the reality is that for transit, it's a gateway. A job in transit has long been a gateway to the middle class for many Americans. And I think there's a renewed focus on that, on bringing people in, on making sure people know that transit is a great career. and it's an opportunity to have a full and beneficial career as opposed to something where you're kind of working bit by bit. And so there's a heavy focus on that hiring among agencies. And I think one of the things that I think, so Ryan Brumfield at North Carolina DOT, when we talked, one of the things he brought up was the notion of having a national salary study to help transit agencies hire more competitively, to really be able to be as competitive as possible in a tight, demanding, dynamic labor market. So that's important too. And then another one, the fifth recommendation is around routes and service, redesigning routes, running more frequent service. To the point about essential workers and essential riders, Scott made a great point about this pandemic has shown us who our core riders are, who uses the service and needs the service the most. And now the opportunity is there for agencies, and some have already begun to do this, to look at realigning and redesigning service to make sure that core customers, those people, especially who never stopped riding during the pandemic, have the best possible service so that they can get to school, to work, to shopping, and to family and friends, and every one of their life needs, and have transit be able to really support that in the most optimal ways possible. Had a really good conversation with Greg Jordan of the Greater Portland Metro. They've done some really interesting work with their agencies in the Greater Portland region. They've formed a partnership called Transit Together. And they built a map to show everybody where you could go to get vaccines and how transit could get you there. And that's part of a larger collaboration project to make transit throughout the Greater Portland region more seamless. They started to work on this before the pandemic, and the pandemic really accelerated that work. And that's happening in agencies and regions all around the country. And then that comes to the last recommendation, which is around demand response, expanding demand response services. This appears to me to be a huge growth area for the industry right now.
Yes.
Agencies are across the country are piloting, are testing, are rolling out demand responsive services that I think really this is a major opportunity, I think, to, if you think about the argument of can transit provide coverage, versus can they provide frequency? If you're looking at everything through a fixed route lens, sometimes it feels like there's a dichotomy there. You can either run more routes in more areas with lower frequency, or you can run fewer routes and higher frequency. What demand response really does is it creates an opportunity to do both, to take the highest demand areas, the areas where you've got the most need for fixed route service, for frequent service, and run the most frequent service that meets customer needs and helps grow transit use and support really good frequent mobility. And then to take demand response and put it in areas where there's emerging opportunity, emerging need for transit, but there isn't enough yet to support a fixed route, bus service, and begin to build service in those areas. And what's great about demand response is it can do two things. It can stimulate service potentially to a point where you switch over and you run a fixed route service. But in areas where you might never have the demand for a fixed route service, on-demand gives you the ability to put transit in an area and give people a service that can have a really great customer experience and give them mobility and access and connections and allow them to access the larger network. And so I think we're going to see a lot more growth in that on demand in the months and years to come. And I think that's going to become a really important focus area for studying how well this works for the industry, modeling out what agencies can do and how others can learn from that, and then looking at innovative funding models for it.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Stuart. I think mobility on demand, microtransit, whatever you want to call it, is the growth area for us now. And it also, in this era of changing the routes to more frequent, like you were suggesting earlier, heavier use routes, some people may actually move routes off of some areas where there wasn't enough demand to continue that route. There might have been demand pre-COVID, but there isn't now, et cetera. This makes sure we provide equity inclusion for everyone, that it's a safety net, that no one gets left behind.
Exactly. It's a safety net, and it's also valuable to people's quality of life.
Okay.
Out in Eastern Oklahoma, I talked to Michael Lynn at Cherokee Nation Transit, and they're working together with their partners. They've rolled out a new on-demand service that serves a number of rural counties in Eastern Oklahoma. And that it's fantastic to see that, because you think about rural areas, transit might not be the first thing you think about in a rural area. And for folks to have that kind of service rolling out, I'm really excited to see what that does and how that benefits people's lives.
Scott, were you going to say something?
Well, yeah, what I was going to say, Paul, is one of the things that I think that Stuart captured really well was we learned during the pandemic about essential service, right? And who really needed our services, whether it was going to work, going to provide essential services, and who had no other way, frankly, to get around their communities and needed to continue to use public transit to get to a healthcare appointment and these kinds of things. It was great to be able to weave that essentialness that we learned together with new and improved services, because and Stuart, connected those things under the equity umbrella. And it's exactly right. Right now, we've learned a lot about who needs our services most, and we're all trying to address the equity lens, and it's right in front of us. We know exactly who those folks are. We've served them for the last 18 months in very tough circumstances. As we improve fare payment mechanisms and on-demand services and battery electric buses, we're recommending all that goes into the essential and the equity piece. And it works really well like that, Paul.
Yeah. Well, this is a great study. People can get it at the CTAA website, or you could just Google CTAA and the study. It pop right up for me, Stuart. Great work on the study. Scott, thank you so much for being here with us today. I look forward to being with you. As people are listening to this episode, we'll be in Missoula, Montana for the Small Urban Network Conference, and we'll be doing some interviews there as well. Stuart, thanks again for being with us.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you for listening to this week's Transit Unplugged News and Views. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to our guests, John Seber, Stuart Mader, and Scott Berggren for their fantastic interviews. Now, coming up in future episodes, as Paul mentioned, we'll be coming from the Sun Conference, where Paul is at this moment recording some great interviews with transit leaders from across North America. If you're enjoying listening to Transit Unplugged, it would mean a lot to us if you leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. This helps other people find Transit Unplugged, and it lets us know how we're doing. So, until next week, ride safe and ride happy.